Can you recall the first movie that made you really appreciate the medium? A movie that you can always go back to and find more reasons to like it with every watch? Well, I have a few, but this is the first one that I remember having this kind of effect on me. Today, I want to look back at one of the many movie adaptations of the very first vampire novel. Well, the one that put the vampire in the mainstream at least. This is Bram Stoker's Dracula. In this video, I want to talk about what made this movie so memorable to me, and if by chance you did not see it yet, hopefully I can give you enough reasons to do it now. Imagine a 10-year-old boy, born in the heart of Transylvania, or where it used to be at least, who's fascinated with horror movies, even though he gets scared easily and his mom won't let him watch them anyway. On a Monday evening, he sees this trailer on TV, back when cable was still a thing. That caught my attention, to say the least. Now, you'd think that being surrounded by stories of a local legend would make you sick and tired of it, but for me it was the opposite. I was fascinated with this guy, especially the vampire myth. Which is a myth, by the way. We're not actually vampires. Luckily for me, the film would be on that Friday at 10 PM, so I could watch it without worrying of not sleeping at all and having to wake up for school. The novel, written by Bram Stoker, was published in 1897, and while it's not the first book with the main focus being vampires, it's definitely the one that popularized them, which gave way to countless adaptations in all kinds of media. One of these adaptations is Bram Stoker's Dracula, directed by Francis Ford Coppola and released in 1992, in a time where vampires were ugly and supposed to scare you and didn't look like Brad Pitt. Yet. The movie begins with how Vlad the Impaler becomes a vampire. Excuse me for a minute. Okay, so I just checked and this is not in the novel. So yeah, as with many page-to-screen adaptations, some creative decisions were taken just to form a narrative more appropriate for a film. Because it's hard to turn a novel made out of journal entries, articles, captain logs, and letters into a straightforward movie. And we'll get into some of these changes a bit later. Our boy Vlad is played by Gary Oldman, who absolutely nails this performance. I mean, he owns it. And God bless him, because he's the strongest point in this entire movie. Oldman is great in everything he's in, and this movie showcases him in a lot of different forms, all performed expertly and with passion. I remember seeing him in that cool armor and devil-looking helmet. However, looking back at it, I'm not sure how practical it would be in the real life. But hey, I wouldn't just stand around if that thing came towards me on the battlefield. Look at him, he absolutely slaughtered everyone, and at the end, like a good disciple of God, he thanks the Big G for his triumph. One thing that stands out in this intro, and continues to do so throughout the movie, is the musical score. It's haunting. This is the first movie that managed to scare me only through its score, and combine that with the atmosphere of hell, and let's just say I don't want to be one of those soldiers. Well, maybe those in the background. They look pretty safe back there. Next up in the star-studded cast, we have Anthony Hopkins playing Abraham Van Helsing. He also narrates this opening scene. And it also took me an embarrassing amount of time to figure out that he also plays the priest that witnesses Dracula's denouncing of God. His Romanian is almost flawless, by the way. Hopkins is more tame in his role compared to Oldman, but he still remains enjoyable and carries most of the scenes he's in.
Was she in great pain?
Yeah, she was in great pain. Then we cut off her head and drove a stake to her heart and burned it, and then she found peace.
Doctor!
Rounding out the main cast, we have Winona Ryder as Minna Murray, Richard E. Grant as Jack Seward, Cary Elwes as Arthur Homewood, and Billy Campbell as Quincy Morris. And last but not least, John Wick himself is in this movie. Yeah, Jonathan Harker is played by our boy Keanu, who without a doubt gave it his all.
Did you for one instant taste of their blood?
No.
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 What the fuck? Yeah, so as a lot of people inevitably point out, Keanu's not very good in this role. Along with Winona Ryder, they have the weakest performances, although besides her accent, Winona does have a lot of good scenes too. This movie happened after Bill and Ted, but before Speed and The Matrix, so Reeves was still in this limbo period of his career. But don't worry, Keanu. We forgive you. Accompanying the haunting, overly dramatic score, composed by the late Wojciech Kilar, the sets for this movie are lavish and striking. Alright, look, not that I was alive back then or anything, but I'm fairly certain we did not hang wolves on our crosses, okay? That's just cruel. But really, the effort put into these sets is evident, and are so good that Thomas E. Sanders and Garrett Lewis were nominated for an Academy Award that year. The costume design, on the other hand, even won the Academy Award thanks to Aiko Ishioka, who took inspiration for the outfits not only from the time periods in the movie, but also from animals, insects, and even paintings. And that's what this movie looks like. You could pause at random during its runtime and find most frames are perfect to hang on the wall. While watching it for the first time, it felt like I was in a very intricate nightmare. Makeup is another element to note since it also won an Academy Award and is completely insane. Dracula can turn into bats and wolves, but in this movie they upgraded him slightly to the Wolfman and Man-Bat. They look great, don't get me wrong, but I can't really see Dracula going unnoticed with these kind of transformations. But I guess it's fine. He can turn to mist after all. Bright green mist. While on the subject of awards, there's one more that this movie grabbed. Sound effects editing, which are sometimes subtle, most of the time not so much. I do recommend a pair of headphones for the best effect. Don't worry, I won't jump scare you.
Welcome to my home. Enter freely of your own will and leave some of the happiness you bring.
I am at a loss, I admit. I've taken the liberty of cabling Abraham von Helsing, the metaphysician philosopher.
All of these working together craft an experience that I feel very few movies offer nowadays. They complement each other wonderfully and grab your attention and never let go until the end. What's criminally underrated is the way they did the visual effects for this movie. Coppola hired his son, Roman Coppola, as second unit director and also to oversee the visual effects, which were all either done practical or in camera. In a time where digital effects were picking up momentum and becoming the norm. This all adds to the overall style of the movie, which helps it stand the test of time. As for how faithful it is to the novel, well, it is one of the most faithful adaptations, however it has some major distinctions and we'll get to those in a bit. Its narrative structure gets criticized for feeling disjointed and sometimes confusing. Funnily enough, that's one of the reasons it's so accurate to the book, it being an epistolary and all. And the movie conveys this through a lot of narrations, mainly from Van Helsing, Jonathan, and Mina. The main plot points are there as well, however, as movie adaptations do, things either get left out or changed completely, which is obvious if you watch some of the deleted scenes. This scene, for example, always felt weird to me.
Acquired Carfax Abbey in London. Why do they fill these boxes with earth?
It's not necessarily bad, but in the novel it goes something like this. After Jonathan goes for a hike through the castle, he walks into the Count's gypsies filling boxes with earth and also his personal bed. At this point, Jonathan knows he's a prisoner and tries to kill the Count in the easiest game of whack-a-drac ever and still manages to screw it up. At which point, Dracula gives him a friendly smile and Jonathan bails. In the movie, this scene was all in there and they even reused this shot of Dracula's face a bit earlier, but they decided to shorten it. A lot. But it did give us the boxes full of earth plot points, so I guess it's all okay. The biggest change in this movie is the fact that Mina is the reincarnation of Dracula's wife, which gets set up in that epic intro. Also, seeing stuff like this as a kid born in a Christian family was only slightly traumatizing, and this scene was even bloodier initially, but they managed to dial down the red. Oh, and this one. All this never happens in the novel. Stoker wrote Dracula as this pure evil force of nature with no redeemable qualities and just wants to feed on the population of England. Coppola, on the other hand, wanted to make Dracula a tragic figure, a fallen angel, a man so angry with God's unfair judgment that he goes against everything he once stood for. One thing that plays a big part in the movie is sexuality, while in the novel, friendship is the main focus. Often to extents that seem a bit ridiculous, at least from my perspective, but those were different times, I suppose. You should see the medical procedures they were practicing.
My God. There's no time to be lost. Must be a transfusion at once. Good God. You're the fiancé? Please. Please. Take off your coat. This young lady is very ill. She's dying. She wants blood, and blood she must have.
That poor creature has had the blood of 2 men put into her already.
Man alive, her whole body couldn't hold that much blood.
You gotta understand that medical science was not there in 1897. The ABO blood types were discovered 4 years later, so if you physically recoil at some practices in this movie, then it's fine, you're not alone. So because of this added romance with Dracula and Mina, the movie also ends on a bittersweet note, whereas the novel ends on a happy ending that takes place 7 years after they kill the Count, with the gang paying their respects to Quincy since he died in their final encounter. Some other minor changes are Renfield's character, played with wonderful lunacy by Tom Waits, being Jonathan's predecessor in selling Dracula his property in England, which was also done in the 1931 film. It does make sense, since the novel is pretty vague on how Renfield and the Count actually met. Dracula's connection to Vlad the Impaler is also kept vague in the novel. They don't directly name Vlad Tepes, but Helsing does state that the Count was once Voivod Dracula, and there's only one famous guy in Transylvania with that name, which is infuriating for some historians since Vlad the Impaler never ruled Transylvania. He was born here, but he ruled Wallachia 3 times for about 7 years in total. I won't go into historical inaccuracies, by the way, because that would take too long. A lot of Romanian people I've seen hate the novel for this reason, which is a bit silly. That's like hating 300 because it's not historically accurate. It's just fiction, guys, they're not history books. Anyways, the whole connection with Vlad Tepes is set up in the intro, along with the main motivation for Dracula. His wife committed suicide because she thought he was dead. Then the priests are like, yo, she damned to hell forever because God said so. And that understandably ticks Vlad off, so he defiles the church, drinks the blood from the cross, cursing him to eternal bloodthirst. Another character that is accurate to the novel, but not really, is Lucy Westenra, Mina's childhood friend that gets turned into a vampire early on. Lucy, played by Sadie Frost, is what brings together our vampire hunting group both in the novel and the movie. However, her dynamic with the other characters is what separates the 2 versions. In the book, it's all about her friendship with the 3 men that wanted to marry her. Even after choosing Arthur as their spouse, Quincy and Jack remain loyal friends to her, and this strong devotion passes on to Mina after Lucy dies. In the movie, let's say Lucy passes something else to Mina, which may or may not stir the feeble brain of a 10-year-old. Dracula's main power seems to be making people as horny as he is. Speaking of horny old men, Van Helsing is pretty much the same as he is in the novel, just a bit more wacky and less of an old man in a foreign country. Also, remember the priest in the beginning? This does raise an interesting theory, that this priest is an ancestor of Van Helsing who started their legacy to hunt down Dracula after witnessing his sacrilege. Kinda like the Belmonts in Castlevania. Van Helsing even admits that he's been looking for Dracula his entire life later in the movie.
What is the cause? It cost my soul!
It is Dracula, the undead. The foe I have pursued all my life.
Whereas in the novel, this is only the first time he even hears about Dracula. These changes make this movie feel bigger at the risk of possible plot holes, but that never feels detrimental to the plot. I've shown bits of it here, but I do recommend watching the bonus features and behind the scenes footage. It shows a lot more of the effort they put into this that I could cover, and it shows the thought process behind most of the decisions taken, in order to bring the story to a whole nother artistic level. This book is hard to adapt into a single movie. If it would get made into a series, then I believe you can truly capture the full, unaltered story. So I guess Netflix or someone should pick it up, and adapt it as faithfully as possible without any kind of alteration. What's there left to say? This is one of the best vampire movies out there, and I feel a good introduction to the story of Dracula if you haven't read the novel. Which I do also recommend, by the way. The musical score accompanied by the visuals and art direction with a great antagonist, the lack of CGI and digital effects that would have just dated the movie, and a classic source material create this unique gothic love story that I believe everyone should give a watch.
You know how it is when you're a kid, sometimes you have a personal connection with like a favorite movie or a fairy tale or whatever it is. It's something that it was sort of, you thought it was yours. I remember as a kid, loving horror films, and in particular Dracula.